guys, as you can see, my garage is a mess. This is the reality of doing a project car build. Things are gonna get a little messy. You're gonna have parts everywhere. It's just important that you know where everything is and you know how to stay organized. But for now, let's go ahead and start off and discuss, what parts we're gonna be putting into the Turbo Miata, what the kit consists of, and what we're gonna be installing today. So, the first thing we're gonna go over is, what all came with the Fab9 Turbo kit and what all do you need to get on your own to prep for the kit install. So the kit comes with, all your intercooler piping, everything you need for the intercooler piping. It comes with the manifold. It comes with a downpipe connection, but that does not connect to the factory setup. So this downpipe is a 3-inch V-band, which of course will not work with your factory exhaust. So you do need to come up with a solution. My solution for that is they do give you this other V-band side. I got a 3-inch to 2.5-inch reducer, and I'm gonna go to exhaust shop and have them weld it for me once I figure out, the distance that it needs to be on my factory mid-pipe. So again, if you just look at that right there, it fits like real nicely and it reduces it very smoothly to 2.5 inches. And that was something I was really looking for. Some of them kind of have like a stepped reduction, and I wanted a smooth reduction so it would have better flow. So this is how I'm gonna be what I'm going to be using to figure out the exhaust routing. All right, so what else do we got in the kit? We got fuel injectors, which we'll be go ahead and installing today. These are going to be super easy. They're just plug and play. You don't even have to use plug and play adapters. You literally just swap them out with the factory ones. And I already looked, and for the NC Miata, it's only 2 bolts to replace your fuel injectors and a plug on each one. So super easy to replace. So we're going to go ahead and be doing those today. We also got our turbo drain. So we need to, drill the hole for our turbo drain in the block. It's probably the sketchiest part of the entire install. I already have the 1/2-inch MPT drill bit and tap from my last turbo build, actually. And you do need a 1/2 inch. So the instructions that come with this kit do not match this kit anymore. It says to use a 3/8. This is not 3/8. I measured this and I reached out to Fab9 to verify. They did upgrade this to a 1/2-inch NPT. So they upgraded this to 1/2-inch NPT because that matches the outlet for the turbo. So this fitting is actually the turbo outlet, and you can see that these are pretty much exactly the same size. So you can imagine if this was still 3/8, it would probably be a little bit smaller than that, which wouldn't be ideal. Turbo draining is extremely important with EFR turbos. Besides that, we got our oil and coolant lines. They give you some nice stainless steel lines with heat shielding already on it. They got some extra lines depending on how you need to run your sensors, if you want to maintain your factory sensor or not. They also give you a 4AN adapter that goes where your factory oil gauge went. So they do include this with the kit. And then you got your drain line. So this is going to be the turbo drain line. It would be nice if this was an AN solution, but this will work just fine. Maybe I'll do AN in the future. Got your intercooler, really nice big treadstone intercooler. This thing is thick. It's got a really nice mounting bracket. It bolts right in place on the Miata, and it's in a really sweet location. So we got all that stuff. We got our filter, we got the manifold, fuel pump. I already, installed the fuel pump in a previous video. All right, and then of course we got the turbo. This is our EFR 6758. We already did a full video on how to clock that in preparation for the install. So if you haven't done that yet, definitely go watch that video. Do this before you start your install because it's just another thing you can get out of the way, as well as the fuel pump. So we did do the fuel pump install previously on the car. So if you haven't watched that video, definitely give it a peek. It'll help you, with the full install of that fuel pump. You're going to want to do the clocking, the fuel pump, and anything little that you could do beforehand before you do the big install for a turbo. Because when you do a turbo install, you're going to be tearing a lot of things out. Maybe not the intake like I am right now, because I'm also doing a Fab9 intake manifold video at the moment, which will be coming to the channel soon, so stay tuned for that. I also replaced, some coolant lines down here. I'm going to be replacing this soft line for the clutch. I'm gonna keep the hard lines. I'm a big fan if something has a hard line, keeping the hard line, because hard lines don't flex at all. Even if it is one of those stainless steel, lines, Teflon lines, they typically do have a slight bit of stretch, compared to a hard line. So I will be replacing this soft line. There's a short run in the NC that is a soft line, so I'm gonna replace that with a stainless steel braided line since this car is about 15 years old. But yeah, today, we're gonna go ahead and be pulling out our exhaust system. So we're gonna be removing this heat shield, removing that heat shield, removing the headers, and getting the turbo just in position to where I can see where, I need to make the drain hole, and that I can start to kind of figure out how the exhaust is gonna fit. So this is not gonna be done in one day. I wanna be really clear on that. If you're doing a turbo install, do not expect to be done with it that exact day. There may be little things you run into. You may need, to extend a sensor. You may need to get a certain AN line fitting or something like that. This kit should mostly be plug and play, but there's always little things that you run into while you're doing turbo installs. For example, for mine, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to run my catch can setup? I really haven't, figured that out fully yet. I know I want to mount something over here, but I don't know if I want to recirculate it back into the intake manifold. If I just want to do a vent to atmosphere setup, I'm still kind of debating through that. But again, when you're doing your turbo install, kind of think about all the things you could be upgrading or doing in here while you're doing it. Or if you're doing the intake manifold, same thing. Like, you can get down to all these little coolant lines that are normally really hard to get to. With this out of the way, it's also going to make me pulling this factory oil filter mount and cooler out a lot easier by being able to go from above and from below at the same time. So again, there's a lot of things you want to think about before you start doing your turbo install. All right, guys, so first to start off, we have to remove this heat shield because we got to get this out of the way so we can get to this heat shield, and then eventually we can get to all the header bolts and remove the header. So we got to start off with this heat shield. This thing is a pain to get off. From everyone I've talked to, both of these can be a pain to get off because sometimes these bolts are going to be seized. These ones are just really hard to get underneath. I'm going to show you where these are. One thing I recommend is that you have some pair of gloves on. This sheet metal can cut your hand very, very easily. If you've ever worked on cars, you've probably cut your hands. So wear some thick gloves if you have them. This will really save your hands. So let's go ahead and look at, where the bolts are. So I'm going to kind of go around to this side of the car so you can get a better view. So we got one right up there. We got one down in there, but you can see the nuts on the underside. So that one's going to be really tricky to get to. And then you got another one right there, another nut on the underside. That one won't be as bad to get to. This is kind of the main one I'm worried about that I think is going to be a pain in the butt. But we're going to go ahead and get a wrench on those, and I'll show you guys how to do it. All right, just broke the first one loose. I used a non-flex head 10mm wrench and just put it on there and just started, getting it loose. It was a little bit difficult. I did have to initially tap the wrench with a mini sledge just to break it loose. But once it broke loose, it's coming out really nicely now. All right, and as you can see right there, the bolt is easily visible from the bottom of the car, so should be able to get that to that with some extensions. It's about, 1.5 feet of extensions that you're gonna need to get to that 10mm, but it does look like it's easily accessible from the bottom of the car, so let's go ahead and take it out. All right, so we got that one out from the bottom. That wasn't too bad. Now we just need to get this one back here. As you can see, you're not really gonna be able to put a straight wrench on that too easily, so I'm guessing a flex head 10mm wrench should be ideal for this. I'm gonna go ahead and try taking it off with one of those now. All right, we got the nut off. I did have to, continue to do the whole thing with the ratchet. That just didn't come off very smoothly. Not a big deal though. So, yep, should just come right out. Got that out of the way. All right, next thing we need to do is we need to take off this heat shield as well. So this is the one that I think probably gonna cause me the most problems. These bolts look completely shot. Those look so rusted. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna hit it all with some PB Blaster. So I'm gonna hit all these with some PB Blaster. I'm gonna let it soak for about 5 minutes, go grab a drink or something, and then I'll come back and try to hit them all off. I'm probably gonna use an impact wrench on the ones that I can because I want them like zipped out of there as fast as I can. I don't really care if they snap off. I just want those heads off there to where I can take the shield off. So if you're trying to keep this, you might not want to do that. For me, I don't really care. If I'm not going to be using this header ever again once I go turbo, so I'm just going to try to zip those out with an impact gun if I can. All right, so as you can see, the mini sledge trick works really well with stuck bolts, especially areas where you can't get a lot of leverage and really like push something where you want to. You know, all I could use here is pretty much finger strength, maybe a little bit, you know, on my arm, but you know, with that mini sledge, you're giving kind of shocks to the bolt, and that's gonna help break things loose, kind of like an impact wrench. So, you know, if you are having trouble getting these out, definitely try using a mini sledgehammer. All right, we got the upper heat shield out. Not too bad of a job. I was surprised how clean this thing is on the bottom side of it. You know, where it just is sitting against the headers. It looks almost brand new on the bottom side compared to the top side where it looks, you know, definitely its age. So I might try cleaning this up and reusing it. I've seen some people reuse this heat shield, you know, over the headers. And I always like, you know, having more heat shielding, especially with these plastic valve covers until I upgrade it to a metal one. But yeah, it's definitely in good condition on the bottom. Looks like crap on the top. All right, all these header bolts look extra corroded as well. Some of them near, you know, the edge of the engine look a little better than some in the middle, but I'm gonna go ahead and hit all of them with some PB Blaster as well, just to make sure that I don't have any trouble getting these out. I have had to redo my header studs before on other cars, so, you know, I really wanna make sure that these come out nicely. Let them soak for a while with some PB Blaster. Now one on the front, again, put a towel underneath it. That way you're not getting oil into your alternator. All right, now we're gonna let those marinate for a while, and you know, hopefully that oil will help break those loose. And then once, you know, we've let those go for a little bit, we'll try to go ahead and take them off. I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the lower connection right now, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, guys, so hopefully you can see that. That's the connection that we need to take off. So you're gonna go ahead and undo these two bolts, and that's gonna disconnect your mid pipe from the header. From there, I'm gonna unplug my O2 sensors. I'm not gonna disconnect them right now and unscrew them from the header. I'll do that once I take it out because it'll be easier to get to them once I take it out of here. So I'm gonna go ahead and undo these, and then we'll go to the top and remove the top bolts to the header. All right, guys, I was looking underneath the card. I did notice it looks like the header's also mounted to this mount right here. So it looks like it's held in by these two 12mm nuts. There's also a bolt over there, but I don't think I can really get to that as easily with this, you know, in the car right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and undo these two right here, these 12mm nuts. They were a little corroded, so I did hit them with some PB Blaster in advance, and I'm letting that soak as well. All right, guys, we had the first snap bolt of the build. Luckily, this one does not matter, and its snapping was just as good as getting it off. So this was one of those header bolts on the bottom down there that held it to the mount. They were both horribly corroded. I did let them soak with PB Blaster, but as you can see, this one didn't come loose, but it did snap off completely, so it's just like I took it off, and it actually might give me more room since now there's no stud either. But I did get one of them off. This one didn't come off. This one snapped. Again, not a big deal because I'm not reusing these headers at all. All right, guys. So I went ahead and removed just that lower section of the heat shield. That way it's a little bit easier to get to some of these bolts. You might be able to get to them with it left in, but it definitely looks a lot easier. Getting this out from there was a little bit difficult, so I did have to kind of force it and bend it. These edges are very sharp, so watch these edges along your lines right here. What I did is I put a towel in between that part. I popped this lower lip over the edge first. So this lower lip right here, I popped that side up, I popped this side up, and then I yanked it out like that. I don't really care if I bend this because I'm probably not reusing this piece at all. But just want to show you guys, you know, how I got that out of there. Again, be very careful with your hard lines right here. You do not want to mess those up. Next, we're going to want to undo the O2 sensors. You can see the connection to the upstream and downstream O2 sensors right there. They're just clipped, so you'll just press them with your hand and pull them off, and there's two. So once those are disconnected, that means all the connections to the header are loose, and then you'll just have to undo those upper bolts. All right, these have all been soaking for a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and start to undo them. I'm probably going to start with the worst looking one first, which is that middle one, and then I'm going to slowly kind of go around and do them all and loosen them up. I'm not going to just fully take them all out because I want to take out whatever one's the hardest to get out first. That way the weight of the header is kind of sitting on whatever ones are maybe a little bit easier. But these look to be about 15 millimeter, so I'm going to take a 15 millimeter wrench and go ahead and get started. All right, so those two that were in the spots where I needed the extension, this seemed to be the perfect setup for them, just a regular extension with a longer socket, again 15 millimeter. I was able to get to both of them very easily. You do have to kind of maneuver the wrench down in here, but once you do that, it gets on there perfect in both locations, so just take your time maneuvering your wrench and getting it on. Again, that very far back one now is the last one to get, and I think with a short socket, I should be able to get it. I have to get like the perfect size short socket though, because I do need it. There's a stud sticking out, so I do need enough depth on the socket in order to get it, you know, seated. Let me go ahead and zoom in on that one so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so there's the last one that I'm talking about. It's way in the back right there, kind of against the firewall. So you can see, you know, how that one's gonna be a little bit more difficult to get to. All right, guys, all the bolts are broken loose. That very far back one, I ended up just using you know, shallow socket. It does have to, again, be deep enough to where you can actually get you know, the stud in there and actually have enough of the socket on the nut. So keep that in mind, that you do want it to be fully seated on that nut. If you don't do that, you might end up rounding your nut, and then that's gonna cause a whole headache. I can imagine trying to get, you know, a nut off that's rounded way back in that corner. That would be a complete pain. So just kind of keep that in mind, you know, that you do want to make sure that you have enough depth and that you're fully seated at a proper angle. And sometimes what I like to do is push the end of the socket so it sits flat while you're doing it. So sometimes you can just like kind of rest your thumb there while you're pulling it up. On this one, to break it loose, there wasn't a lot of room to move it. So again, I used a mini sledge and just tapped the end of the wrench to kind of break it loose. It worked perfectly. All right, I almost missed doing this one before I did the top middle. There's this one, you know, that required the extra socket back here. So make sure you get them all. I actually almost missed this one down under here, but it's coming out nice and easily. Hopefully I'll be able to get a hand on it soon after I break it a little bit more loose. All right, that was probably the hardest one, but it wasn't really bad. It would just like kind of tighten up and then get loose, and I'd have to put a wrench back on it, and then I could do it by hand. I ended up kind of loosening it between my fingers like this and just loosening it by hand. It's a pretty difficult spot to get your hands into, unless maybe you have those Subaru mechanic hands. All right, and that should be all of them. So let's just go ahead and give this a little pull. Yep, looks like it is loose. So now I gotta figure out, how am I gonna get this out of here? I'm probably gonna move this coolant line real quick because obviously just having that bigger opening is gonna be nicer. I'm also might loosen up this hard line as well, just so I have some more flexibility to kind of push this maybe up and over a little more. I think that's what I'm gonna do. That looks like it's gonna be the best idea, is take this off, loosen this out of the way. That way these headers can come out and get pulled up in here, because there's really not a lot of room, it looks like, to pull these out. All right, so to make it easier to get the header out, I did end up snapping one of these studs, but it was still kind of locked in place right here, and I couldn't really pull it outwards, as much as I needed to. So I ended up loosening this bolt to this header mount. This header mount has to come out anyway, so it's gonna have to be taken out. It will definitely be easier to get, once the header's out of the way. But for now, it did, allow this to swing, which made it, give me a lot more room right here to where I can now pull the header out from up top. So now we're gonna go ahead and do that. But again, you're probably gonna need to loosen this bracket in order to get the header out. All right, guys, so I went to take the header out and there just wasn't enough room to pull it up to the top, even with those things out of the way. It seemed like the alternator was really what was getting in the way. Specifically, the back of it, which you have to take off anyways. So I loosened up the back of it right here, which you can see. Here, let me get a better view. So I loosened up the back of it that you can see right here. It had 3 8mm bolts on the back. So what I did is I kind of pushed the header out of the way to the back, got a wrench on the back of these, and there's 3 8mm bolts. And then there's 3 14mm holding in. There's one here, one on the bottom under here, and then the other one you get from the driver's side wheel well. And you'll go up through here and you can kind of see it if you look, let's see, up at an angle right over there. That bolt right there is the one that gets you to the alternator. So I went ahead and loosened those 3 so the alternator is loose. So now I can kind of take the shield out, because before it was too tight against the block to pull the shield out. So now with the shield out of the way, this metal shield, I should be able to pull the headers right out. All right, and if you didn't put at least a little bit of blood into your car, did you really build it? So got the first bit of blood, blessing into the car. So gonna go ahead and keep going, but that happened loosening up the alternator bolt on the bottom. I had to use a lot of extensions, and when that thing cracked loose, my hand went straight into my caliper, jacked my thumb up pretty nicely. But we should be ready to go ahead and get the header out of the car, so we're gonna go ahead and try pulling that out now. All right, there we go. Header is out of the car. We are ready to start mounting the turbo and doing some mock-ups on the fitting. All right, guys, so I went to mock fit the turbo and I was having some issues with the turbo hitting this stud. So I talked to the guys at Fab9 because I read something that, you didn't need to cut this stud anymore and that was no longer required. And they did confirm that, yeah, they haven't had to cut any, there was a revision to the manifold, but you do still need to pull this piece and drill this out if you have a 2.0. So if you have a 2-liter, you're gonna have to pull this piece and then drill out these holes with a 1/2-inch drill bit. That's gonna give you a little bit more distance to push the engine up pulling this piece down, which is gonna, again, tilt your engine a little bit more to that side, which is gonna give you just that little bit of clearance to get past this stud. I was just barely hitting this and it wasn't allowing the turbo to go into the proper position. Again, so that we're not gonna cut this, we're just gonna change the orientation of the engine to where it's pulling up the manifold a little bit and just changing this angle slightly. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this now. In order to do that, you have to pull this plate under here. So you're gonna pull that plate, I'm pretty sure it's 12 or 14 millimeter bolts, and then you're gonna get a piece of wood and a jack, and you're gonna have to support your engine and jack up your engine to take the weight off of this mount. And then once you do that, you can take out those bolts, pull that piece out while it's supported, and then put it back in and lower it back down. So I'll go ahead and do that now and show you how it's done. All right, so I got my jack set up. I got the wood on the oil pan. I just push it up maybe an inch or so, you know, just so it's taking the load off the mount. Now I'm gonna go ahead and loosen those bolts holding the mount in. All right, now we got the nut out. We got both of the bolts out from the top up there. We also got the one from the bottom. There's one you have to get from underneath. So all those are out, you know, it should come right off. Keep in mind, you need to keep your jack holding the engine up. Once you pull this off, there's nothing holding it on. So when you're taking these bolts out, this needs to be supported the whole time. So it should come right out now. You just lift it up out of the way. And now we're gonna go ahead and drill this out with a 1/2-inch drill bit, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. All right, guys, now we're gonna go ahead and drill this out with a 1/2-inch drill bit. So I got my 1/2-inch drill bit, got my piece in a table vise, and we're gonna drill all 3 of these holes out real fast. It's probably gonna wanna kick on you when it catches on parts of this, but this is aluminum, so it should go pretty well. Just make sure you don't push it too fast or it's gonna wanna catch. Guys, got it all cleaned up. This looks complete. All the holes are drilled out, nice and big. The key to drilling this out is just to go nice and slow with light pressure. Once the pressure is real light, you'll kind of bounce in there. Just make sure you're kind of holding the weight of the drill out of it. If you do too much pressure, it's gonna catch and kind of torque on you. That's what I kind of realized as I was doing it. If I pushed really light, it just went nice and smooth and it was pretty easy. So yeah, it's all set. We're gonna go ahead and put it back in the car now. All right, guys, I got the mount back in place and I went ahead and hand tightened the bolts on the top and the one on the bottom. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jack the engine up slightly, a little bit more until it's kind of hanging. I don't want it kind of bottomed out where this bolt is. I want it to be hanging here a little bit and have a little bit of a gap here. That way I can make sure that this is pushed all the way down. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to push this mount down. That way it's going to be pushing the engine, again, tilting it that way a little bit higher by pushing this down and locking those 3 bolts in. That's going to make that do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's what you're trying to do here. So again, you want to, once you get these in here, keep them really loose, just put them in by hand, but put them loose, jack it up, and then you're going to go ahead and tighten them up before you jack it back down. All right, so there we go. We got it jacked up where, you know, it's just floating right here. Now I'm going to tighten the top two, and then I'm going to tighten the bottom one. Then I'll jack it, let it go down, and then I'll put the nut on here and we'll tighten that up. All right, now we took the pressure off, and now, you know, you can put the 17 millimeter nut on here and tighten it up. Another thing that's 2-liter specific is you do need to grind down this stud on this motor mount nut. So this is the same motor mount that we drilled to a 1/2 inch. You also need to grind this stud completely away. So what I did is I put a cutoff wheel down in here, and I put the handle on the top of the cutoff wheel, and I cut it from this side going that way. It was a pretty good angle, you know, just to cut this kind of flash. I even cut a little bit of the nut, you know, and so it got a little bit more clearance, but you do need to cut this completely flat. If you have a 2.5, you don't need to do this anymore. The 2.5 sits a little bit higher, so you actually don't need to do this mod if you're doing a turbo install on a 2.5 engine. All right, now you're gonna wanna prep your turbo for your install. So you're gonna wanna go ahead and attach all of your lines that you can and kind of get them oriented how you think they're gonna go. The reason you wanna do this is you're not really gonna be able to get wrenches in here once this is in the car. It's in a really tight spot, so you need to get all these secured, and you wanna get them secured nice and tight. So, you know, first thing you need to do is the AN fittings that Fab9 includes need to be, you know, put into the ports for the coolant lines. So you're gonna put both of those in, and then you're gonna use the AN lines that have the 6 AN on one side and then the 4 AN on the other. The 4 AN side with the right angle is gonna go on the coolant side on each side. The shorter line is gonna go towards the passenger side of the car, longer line towards driver side of the car. Your oil line is gonna be the one with 4 AN on both sides, and that one you're gonna do the right angle towards the driver side of the car. And then lastly, you got your oil drain, which you're just gonna, you know, I use some blue Loctite on these bolts and put the gasket in place. The one thing you wanna keep in mind with this is make sure that that path is nice and straight. So this thing can be kind of off-centered a little bit. It gives you a little bit of room to move this. So just make sure when you look through that it's a nice straight path for the oil to flow out. Yeah, you're gonna want, again, get all those tightened in place, have it ready to go. I'm gonna be putting a turbo blanket on this turbo, so we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're gonna drop it in the car. I'm actually gonna have my buddy help me drop it in the car because I tried fabbing it up yesterday and getting into position, and I wasn't able to secure the V-band clamp while holding it in place. It seems like you kind of have to have somebody underneath the car holding the turbo in place, and then someone on top tightening the V-band to the manifold. So just keep that in mind. It's probably a 2-person job to get this in. I don't know how you could do it with 1 person unless you had something to hold the turbo in place for you, which I just didn't have anything that came to mind. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get this cover on, and then we'll get this dropped into place. All right, I didn't get this part on video, but wanted to go over it because it's definitely pretty critical. So as you can see with the 2-liter engine, the oil drain ends up going straight down into the motor mount. This will not work. It ends up crimping the hose in a way to where you're gonna have issues with your oil return. And with an EFR turbo, having good oil return is critical. So you can see right there, you know, how the hose is getting crimped because it is just too aggressive of an angle for that hose to make the bend properly. What I ended up doing is I went online and sourced a few different oil drains. I ended up finding one for a T25 turbo from ISR Performance for a Sylvia S13. And what I ended up doing is I ended up cutting it. So you can see the original piece right there, and then where I ended up cutting it, this ended up being the perfect fitting. This piece, you know, made it to where it cleared the motor mount perfectly and avoided any crimps in the hose and went straight to where the oil drain location was. So this is the solution I would recommend for anyone installing this on a 2-liter engine. If you are installing this on a 2.5-liter engine, that engine sits a little bit higher on the exhaust side, so you're not going to have issues with the turbo drain. But if you are installing this on a 2-liter engine, I highly recommend using this piece. You can see right here how it's, you know, clearing the motor mount just perfectly, no issues at all. So again, if you're installing this on a 2-liter engine, this piece from ISR Performance will do the trick for you. I didn't get a video of me dropping the turbo into the car, so I want to go over this part really quickly. So when you do that, you're going to want to put the turbo down on the subframe first, then put your factory gasket back in place, and then put the header in. Then you're going to want to lift the turbo up from the bottom of the car and secure the V-band clamp. When I did this, I found it was easiest to secure the V-band clamp to the header first and then push the turbo up into it and then slowly tighten it all together. It's definitely very difficult. It's much easier if you have an extra pair of hands. Now we're gonna remove the front bumper. The front bumper on NC is really easy to remove. So what you need to do is go ahead and take out all of these bolts, that pop clip, these bolts right here, all these 10 mils, all the way around the entire car. They're pretty easy to spot. So we're gonna take all those off all the way around this top right here. Then we're gonna go on the bottom and we're gonna do all the ones that hold the lip in place as well. So all these little screws that hold this lip in place, these need to come off so this can slide off of there. So you have to go all the way around the car, you know, doing all those. And then you have to get up here and you have to undo these pop clips. And then there's gonna be some screws up in here. I'm pretty sure they went upwards last time, but I'll get a good picture of them soon once I pull the fender liner off. But yeah, you're just gonna undo this front fender liner and then you're gonna go up here and get the bumper off. And here's what it looks like after you remove that first fender panel. Of course, I have vents here, so yours may look a little bit different, and I don't have fog lights. So if you did have fog light, make sure you disconnect your fog light connection before you pull your bumper off. Now we need to undo the 3 10mm nuts on each side. So you can get to them by pulling this panel back. You can take off more of these if you need to. If you're having some difficulty getting to it, just start taking out more of these clips. They come out pretty easily. So we'll take those off. But here's the nuts that you want to be looking for, so you can kind of see them up there. It's the ones up high. So there's one there, and then there's one right up in here. And then be careful pulling it out because you do have these stakes that help put it, keep it in place and help put it back on. So again, you're just going to undo those 3 nuts on each side, and then the bumper will be ready to come off. All right, so the last screw is going to be behind these caps. So these actually pop off. You can usually just kind of grab them by the bottom right here and pop them off. There we go, there's one. They just have, some clips, and they go back on pretty easily. I haven't had any issues with them yet. So you're gonna wanna pop those off, and then you just need to undo these 10mm inside the bumper here. There'll be one on each side behind each cap. They both come off. So we'll go ahead and undo those, and the bumper will be ready to take off. All right, guys, now all the connections to the bumper should be disconnected. We got our fog light turn signals disconnected. We got the 2 bolts in the front behind the covers disconnected. We got the 3 bolts at the top up here disconnected. We got all the bolts on the top and the bottom along the top surfaces disconnected in the bottom surface. So now we're gonna go ahead and pull this off. You can just grab it by the top, grab it by the bottom, and just kind of slide it off. It's not too heavy, it's pretty easy to do by yourself. I'm gonna go ahead and just set it on the ground right here and then move it out of the way. Throughout the Fab9 intercooler piping, you have to remove this tray right here. It's just a bunch of those screw pop clips. So you're gonna want a short screwdriver that you can fit in this little area. Then you need to remove the headlight because there's a clip under here. So there's just 3 10mm holding the headlight on. Well, 4 10mm if you count the ones we removed earlier when I removed the front bumper. But yeah, you just go ahead and you're gonna move this out of the way. You don't even need to disconnect it. And then you just need to get to this screw right here and undo this to get this popped off. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. I'm actually not gonna reuse this, so let me just go ahead and put that out there. And there we go, that one is out of the way. So now I can put this headlight back on, and then I'll go ahead and proceed with the other side. I also removed the crash bar, just giving me more space to work when I was drilling the holes for the intake piping. I didn't go over that in this video. It's super easy. It's just a few, I think it was 12mm bolts. All right, now we need to drill the hole for our intake piping into the front bumper. So Fab9 has a diagram of where they show you need to drill this, and they say to use a 3-inch hole saw, kind of drill here and drill around here. So I went ahead and bought a 3-inch hole saw specifically for this. I couldn't disconnect this connector. I'm not sure how to disconnect this one right here. I couldn't find any push tabs anywhere around it. And it's really difficult to kind of look in there as well. So I just zip tied it up out of the way. I kind of marked out rough lines of where I need to go with a Sharpie. Really just finding out where my bottom is, and then, where's my sides. So that's roughly, the dimension that you want to go. And it kind of shows them, one of the 3-inch holes being right here, the other one being over here. So again, I just zip tied this out of the way so it's, in a good spot. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and drill through this now. All right, so I went ahead and drilled my 2 pilot holes. I got one there and one there. That way it's gonna be nice and easy to hold this in place. Now we're gonna go ahead and cut it. And I'm just holding this out of the way. All right, there's the first one. All right, to cut the bottom, I just used a hacksaw with a metal blade. It's a little tricky to use, so be careful. Make sure it's not hitting back and hitting, you know, these hoses or anything like that. My blade was just short enough not to. But yeah, hacksaw with a, or sawzall with a metal blade seems to work fine to cut these edges away. So that way you can get an idea of what we're doing. You know, I just cut it there. I'm gonna cut it up here. I'm gonna put some rubber gasket around the outside of this. That way it won't scratch the piping or anything. But we're gonna go ahead and cut that upper lip now. That looks pretty good. It's decently round. You know, doesn't need to be perfect, especially since I'm going to be using some rubber gasket. I'm going to go ahead and take a deburring tool and just deburr the inside of these edges real fast and make them nice and smooth. And then I'm going to hit this with some sealant, some paint. Probably just some, you know, black anti-rust paint just to cover that up. That way it doesn't rust at all, especially since I'm going to have that gasket on it. You know, water could get caught between. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get back to it. All right, so there's my finished product. Again, not perfect, some jagged edges down here. I did try to smooth them out with a carbide bit and just kind of, you know, rough them down a little bit so they weren't quite as sharp, but you're not gonna be able to make it, you know, too perfect. It is a little difficult of a spot to work with. So I'm gonna go ahead and, you know, again, paint over this real quick so that way it's just sealed from any moisture. And then I'm gonna put a rubber seal all the way around this. That way the pipes won't be resting like directly on this sharp stuff. They'll be resting on like a nice thick rubber weather seal, and that'll create some nice protection. It'll also help, you know, prevent some air from going, you know, between this gap a little bit better as well. So it'll do, you know, best of both worlds. And eventually I'll probably put some foam in between the pipes and around them. That way this is like fully sealed. That way more of the air is being directed, you know, towards the radiator. All right, now we'll just let that dry. All right, here's just a test fitting of the pipe. So as you can see with that rubber liner, it creates a nice seal around the edges. I may just put a piece of foam between them to keep them from bouncing on each other. And then maybe a little piece of foam up in this corner where this hole from the factory is, where that wire's coming through. But, you know, as you can see, it's like a real nice snug fit. This is the weather stripping that I used. I got this off of Amazon. As you can see, it kind of locks in place, you know, onto the rough edges and has a nice thick barrier there with metal between it. So that's going to help prevent your intake pipings from getting cut at all, you know, by having this nice seal. And then again, it's also gonna prevent air from blowing past this and, you know, create more pressure under your radiator. So I highly recommend, you know, using some rubber seal like this for the intake piping. All right, next I went ahead and clocked the turbo properly. So, you know, you just have to loosen that 10 millimeter V-band that holds the front of the turbo, you know, in position. And so I loosened it up, and then I kind of, you know, mounted this to where I found, you know, that it wasn't rubbing on this hose, that it, you know, was clearing here, you know, nicely. It is a real tight fit. As you can see, there's like no room between the valve cover and the ABS for this, but you know, so make sure you're putting like the softer ends, you know, towards your ABS system, because, you know, this is plastic. So obviously you don't want, you know, this bolt rubbing up against that, you know, so I put the bolts over here. Once they're tightened down, you know, they should be pretty much out of the way. This one may rub right here, but that's really not that big of a deal. It is, you know, metal on this lip, so that shouldn't be a problem. I might even turn it a little bit. It looks like if I turn it like that, I can clear and still not, you know, really rub on this. The big thing is you just don't want, you know, any really sharp parts rubbing on rubber. That's, if you can avoid that, you know, you're gonna not getting coolant leaks or anything like that. But this looks pretty good, so it's gonna go straight shot. And again, I already test fitted that 2 pipes will fit through my hole, so I'm good there. Now the tough one is gonna be getting the bottom part on. So for the intake, you have to, you know, slip it way down into there and get it onto the front of the turbo. So that's gonna be pretty tough. I already tried it a few times just to kind of test fit it. So here's, you know, what I got so far. So clamp, I, you know, put down in that position. The shorter pipe side is what goes towards the turbo. So that's gonna be this side. As you can see, I kind of scratched it a little bit here, putting it in. It is really tight. So you're probably gonna scratch the bottom a little bit. Don't be too worried though, you won't really see that part. This is the part that you'll see, you know, on the car. So it goes, you know, that way. And again, you can see like one side is longer, one side shorter. So the shorter side goes towards the turbo. All right, guys, and here's the finished product that I settled with. So I ended up cutting the strips into little pieces. The corners were too sharp to get nice bends there, and you really need all the space that you can get here. So I actually ended up having to grind this down quite a bit more. Please ignore my finger to put more blood into the project. Getting these intercooler pipes to fit down in here and kind of get the perfect fitment was a bit difficult. Some things that I had to do is kind of make sure like the couplers were in certain positions. So like this one right here, you kind of want to tilt it that way, the coupler on the fitting, so that way this pipe's kind of aiming down more. If it's too up, then this won't, you know, route properly. So this is what I ended up doing. And then again, short side of this pipe goes towards the turbo. That was also pretty difficult to get on. You know, you do need to make sure that you're clearing your alternator, you know, with plenty of room. I know it doesn't look like much there, but that's actually a pretty good amount of room. I can put my hand between it. So we got that cleared. And again, this is where your air filter is gonna go. It's gonna go right here. And then this is gonna go to your intercooler. And as you can see, I do have a little bit of play, which is perfect. And that's kind of what I was going for, because I did like mock up the intercooler. This is the bolt holes it goes to, and to see where this exited, and it was like right on top of it. So it looks like it's gonna be good. I'm gonna go ahead and settle with this, but again, I do like the idea of using this rubber stuff right here, because it is just way nicer on the piping. You're not gonna scratch them as much. I did scratch this pipe on the bottom down there, you know, against this part of the car. You can't see it at all, so I'm not really worried about it. And I did scratch this pipe as well, but on the bottom side. So again, not worried about it at all. But do be careful, you know, putting it in, knowing what parts you're gonna be seeing, that you don't wanna scratch those. Yeah, again, that's what it looks like. So let's go ahead, just get another shot. And again, I'll probably put some foam between the two of these. So if I put a little piece of foam there, you know, that's gonna just like kind of insulate them from bouncing on each other and making noise, but it's also gonna help block some of the air. So I'll just jam a piece of foam in there before I put the bumper back on. All right, so one thing I had to do is get a 30-degree 2-inch coupler and cut it shorter. I cut it, it's about 2 inches from the center of the joint to the end on each side. The reason I did this is, you know, I didn't have enough room for the pipe to reach across right here. It wasn't, you know, fitting properly. It was a little too high, and it just wasn't far enough over. I test fitted this already, and it's perfect. It literally fits perfect. It gets the pipe connected perfectly, and it just routes it really nicely. So again, it's just a 30-degree coupler for a 2-inch, and I just cut it a little bit shorter than it was. It was pretty long. So yeah, worked out perfect. All right, guys, as you can see, I added something a little extra here. So I am putting a race spread splitter on this car. I'm not going to do an install video on that. Mitch Yardley has a good one on his YouTube, and it's a pretty easy install. It pretty much just bolts in place. The one thing though is if you are doing it, you do need to cut your under tray. So I had to cut this corner section here. As you can see, you know, this is going to hang straight down, so it would have hit here. So you just have to cut this little corner out on each side. It looks like you could still use your factory under tray. You may not be able to secure the front that well. You'd have to use like a push clip. But I was able, you know, to secure the back part using the bolt for the splitter to hold the under tray in place. So it does allow you to kind of, you know, let it loose like this so you can still get to anything underneath the car. And this is plastic, so if I really need to, I could push this out of the way and fold it if I had to get into anything under there. But really, there's really nothing that I have to maintenance under the under tray that often. Most of the time I'm gonna be doing oil changes, which is, you know, the next one down. So yeah, this is, you know, what it looks like right now. So I'm gonna get that other side up, you know, at the end once I'm done and I kind of have everything lined up how I want. But I wanted to show you, you know, the oil cooler. So I did get this for Armand Hendricks. It's the big Nishimoto intercooler. So it sits right behind the intercooler, perfect. And it, you know, has plenty of space right there. They're not gonna hit or anything. I mounted it just like he recommends in his video. So if you haven't watched his video, definitely watch that. He kind of shows you how he makes this bracket, you know, cuts it at an angle there. So it sits in, you know, these holes on each slot. And then, you know, I went ahead and just made sure that my hoses ran, you know, past the AC compressor and didn't, you know, or the end tank here and didn't hit that. That way, you know, there's no damage. So I had the line on here while I was doing it. I had the top line. The bottom line, obviously, I have even more space to run and, you know, it'll be hose after that. But the top one's really important that one is clearing. So, yeah, got that set up. That way my car is going to be oil cooled, you know, has the intercooler there. And I do have a 42 millimeter radiator. So this should help keep me cool on track. Should be more than enough. This is the biggest one they make. So, yeah, definitely looking forward to having this on. All right, guys, so now I'm ready to go ahead and remove my oil perch. You don't need to do this on most cars. I only need to do this because I'm gonna be putting a Mad Fabworks oil perch here so I can run an oil cooler with it, and I want the extra ports. So if you were just gonna be keeping your stock one, all you would need to do is remove that oil pressure sensor right there, and you would unthread that and put the 4AN orb fitting where that is right now. So if that's what you're gonna do, you know, you would just get rid of that. That's just a dummy gauge anyways. It doesn't really sense oil pressure. It just goes by RPM, so it's kind of pointless to have on your car. It doesn't really do anything. By the time it does tell you anything, it's gonna be too late. So again, you'll just remove that plug right there. Then you'll take that out and then you'll just thread it in a new one. These are MPT threads, so just keep in mind you need to use like a thread sealant or thread tape. I prefer thread sealant if you have it, but thread tape works fine. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and be removing this. So to do that, I'm gonna go ahead and drain my oil, get all the oil out of the system, and then I'm gonna start, you know, take off the filter. Then I'm gonna take off this perch and then put the new one on. The reason why I'm doing this again is so I can run an oil cooler. I'm going to be running an Armand Hendricks oil cooler setup. It's a Nishimoto setup with some 10AN lines. So he already, you know, pre-makes those lines and everything, and, you know, throws in the oil cooler as well. It's a pretty good price to have it all done and just set up. And his instructions on how to set it up are really good. So I'm not even going to really go through that, but I'm just going to show you guys, you know, how to get this off, just in case that's something you're thinking about doing. This is something to think about while you're doing the turbo install. How are you going to be feeding your oil? Do you want to be monitoring your temperatures for certain things? So keep that in mind, you know, as you're preparing. But as you can see, you know, there's my oil feed line up there. So essentially, let me see if I can get my arm through here. This might be a little tight. All right, so, you know, here's the oil feed. So if you had it, you know, your port here, you would just, you know, attach this to that AN fitting here. I don't really like the bend on that. I like the bend a lot more if I just keep it straight and put it up on the top right here. So that's what I'm going to be doing is, again, putting it up on the top of the fitting. And then, you know, again, if you weren't doing that, you'd be connecting it down here. But it reaches there pretty easily. It just hangs on like the back of the transmission. That's the best way to do it with this. Just hanging on the back of the transmission. There's nothing for it to catch on back there, nothing for it to get caught in. So, you know, it's a good place for it to be. All right, guys, and here's my Mad Fabworks oil perch. As you can see, this is solid aluminum piece, a machined aluminum. It's really beefy. It does have a thermostat in it, which is really nice. Allows your car to get up to temp before it starts pumping oil to the oil cooler. And it's just it's already set up to run with an oil cooler as well. Just an overall really nice setup. Gives you plenty of fittings to go to as well. If I did this again, I would have done it slightly different than what I did now. I didn't really think ahead. So what I'm going to be doing is I got one of those Rotary-tronics gauges, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to install that. So that video will be coming out. But this is, the fitting that it comes with. So this is a 1/4-inch MPT to, I believe it's M10x1, fitting where the sensor is. So I tried finding adapters that would fit to this 1/8 MPT so I could run this on the top. So I couldn't find any adapters like this that were long enough to not cover some of this port on this sensor. So there's a little port here on the sensor, and it was just covering that up just a little bit. So see that little hole? A lot of the ones that were made for 1/8-inch NPT were just a little bit too short, and it would just end up clogging that hole a little bit or restricting flow, which may affect your readings, I would expect. If you do have less surface area, less oil, coming through, maybe it would affect it, maybe it won't, but I didn't want to take that risk. So what I'm going to do is, go ahead and use this, in the 1/8 or 1/4-inch MPT spot right here. So I'm going to go ahead and, thread this in. I'm not going to lock it in right now. I'm showing you guys for demonstration purposes. So my setup's going to look like this, and I'm going to be getting that oil feed from the top. So if you were doing this on your own car and you had the stock system, again, this would be going where your old oil sensor was, and you wouldn't even have these ports here. But because, I got the Mad Fabworks unit, I can go ahead and use my oil sensor here, which is what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this 4AN fitting to 1/8 MPT on the top. And it actually works out better, in my opinion. I kind of like how this fed, the line to the back of the engine, so that way it's like going back and around instead of it just coming straight up. And the other thing is that this fitting, is more than big enough for an oil feed. So you can see there it actually reduces to a 4AN. So this 1/8 MPT is plenty big for oil feed for a turbo. And then I'm going to be just plugging the front one. I'm not going to be using that at all. Now, what would I have done differently if I was going to do this again? I would have gotten the Rotary-tronics kit with 2 sensors most likely, and I would have either done them on both sides, or I would have ran one top and bottom and done my oil feed back here still, because then I would have been filling all the holes, and I wouldn't have to use this adapter. Anytime you have an adapter, maybe it's a bigger failure point, but you could also say that having additional fittings could be a bigger failure point as well. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and install this. I'm not going to have this hooked up initially because I do need to pull the gauges out to do that, and I want to get the car running before I do that. So I'm just going to leave it in here. I'm going to plug it in and then just run the wire into the car and just leave it unplugged. And again, this is our oil feed. So next, you're probably wondering, well, what do I do? How do I get these in here? What do I need to, keep in mind? Well, when you're using MPT threads, just keep in mind that you need to use like thread tape or thread sealant. I got some Fab9tu thread sealant. This is fuel safe, oil safe, so this should work perfectly. That's what I'm going to be using on my threads. I like sealant because the sealant's gonna, not shred or anything like that the tape can sometimes do, and it should get, it should seal everything very, very nicely with these MPT threads. And then this is MPT as well, and so I'm going to be putting it on that. This needs to be torqued to 20 foot-pounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go put this in my vise, and I'm going to torque this to 20 foot-pounds, and then I'm going to screw this into the car. That way this is already torqued. It's already set. You need to be very careful when torquing this. If you torque it too tight, you can break the sensor and crack it. And if you do that, you'll get bad readings and you'll start leaking oil. So, definitely don't want to do that. Again, 20 foot-pounds is the limit. I'm going to go, from 10 to 15 to 20. And that's how I'm going to do it, just to be very, very safe. So yeah, we'll go ahead and do that now. And then we're going to get these fittings put in there. Again, thread sealant on the threads. Make sure you put thread sealant on your threads. This is a stainless steel fitting. I went with stainless steel just because it's just firmer. It's not going to, get damaged as easily, and I want it to be pretty much permanent in here. All right, we got that torqued down. I went to 20 foot-pounds. This is a 27 millimeter deep socket, so just keep in mind you need a 27. Again, I just put this in a vise and just tightened it down. All right, we're ready to go ahead and put this in. So this fitting is going to be a 17 millimeter, and then this other, the oil fitting is a 14 millimeter. All right, and there we go. That seems good to me. It's pretty tight on there. I did put it, nice and straight as well, so where it's going to be, look good and it get easy to get, the clip. So keep that in mind. You're going to want your clip easily be accessible to be able to get it on and off. It being on the top will work perfectly in this case. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to this fitting. All right, and that seems good. That seems nice and tight. Again, you don't want to go too crazy with MPTs. Like you'll start to feel them like bind up, and you just don't want to like be torquing it down too hard. You're just looking to get them to start catching, go to that point where they start to really grab. I think both of these are there. All right, last thing I need to do is just plug this hole. They give you a little plug. So again, put some sealant on it or thread tape. This is really small, so sealant's gonna work pretty good here. Thread tape would be kind of long and difficult maybe to get on this perfectly. But yeah, gonna go ahead and put that on, just clog this front hole since I'm not using it. Go. That's nice and tight. Nice and binded. There we go. So that unit is done. It is ready to go on. And there's my factory oil cooler. So it has 2 bolts that you can get, right from the fender pretty easily. And then there's the one right there. I can also get that from the fender. And there's one just right above it that I'm going to get from underneath the car. They're all really easy to get to. It's just 4 bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and take those out. I'm going to go ahead and just tape up my factory connector since I'm not going to be using that oil pressure connector. Again, I'm using an aftermarket Rotarytronics unit. So I'm going to go ahead and just tape that up, and just get it out of the way. Here's a better look at the stock one outside the car. So you can see right there's the sensor. That's where you'd be putting your turbo feed in. And then, those extra coolant lines. So, again, perk of this is you're really deleting coolant lines. Your turbo acts like an oil warmer. This is actually more of an oil warmer than an oil cooler. A lot of people think this is an oil cooler. While it does have that effect, it's an oil warmer because the water gets warmer faster than the oil does. So this helps heat up the oil and get it to operating temperature faster. By having a turbo, I'm gonna have that happening with my exhaust gases. They're gonna be heating up the oil in the coolant faster. So turbo cars typically do heat up faster than NA cars, and deleting this is just getting rid of a bunch of, potential failure points, extra coolant lines, and also, that piece looks a lot nicer underneath the car. All right, we got our oil cooler removed. I wiped the surface nice and clean. This is a metal on metal connection, so you want it nice and clean. I just used some low lint paper towel and just wiped it away. And then, here's how the gasket goes. So this can only go one way. So if you want to put it on here like I did to get an idea of what the fitment needs to be, do that. Because if you put it on like this, you're gonna have a problem. So make sure you know what way your gasket needs to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and, that's gonna go on this way. And then once we get this on, you're just gonna bolt it up. I'm gonna look up the torque specs. My guess, these are 10 mils, probably gonna be around like 15 to 20 foot-pounds. And I'm gonna torque them all down to spec. So this is, the orientation of the gasket. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on now. All right, there's our finished product. I did accidentally nick one of these AN fittings a tiny bit on the edge where it seats. It's not all the way through the edge, so I'm gonna just keep an eye on it. I'll see, how it looks afterwards. Once I get a line on it, it might not leak. If it does leak, I'll replace it, but for now, I'm gonna go ahead and test it out. All right, next part of the turbo install is going to be installing the fuel injectors. I'm going to be doing 800cc injectors, should give me plenty of headroom to run, whatever boost levels I'd like. I don't really plan on running E85 on this car, so again, the 800 should be more than enough. It might even be enough for E85, up to a certain power level, but again, I'm not going to be running E85. So what you need to do is you need to go ahead and undo all the plugs to the fuel injectors. They're real easy. It's just a little button right here. You press it, pull it off on each one. There's 4 of them, of course, for 4 injectors. And then you just need to remove the fuel rail. It looks like it's a 10 millimeter bolt, 2 10 millimeter bolts. So there's going to be one down here and then one over here. And once you remove that, you can pull the whole fuel rail out with all the injectors. You'll put your new injectors in and then just put it right back in place. It's really simple. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, I pulled mine out, and as you can see, the O-rings didn't come out on a couple of them. So it looks like the 2 center ones, the O-rings didn't come out, so I need to get those out with like a pick tool. But just keep that in mind that you need to make sure that these O-rings, see this big one right here, came out on all of them, because you can't put your new ones in if that O-ring's still in there or you won't get a proper seal. So, after that, I'm gonna go ahead and, get those O-rings out of there using like a little hook pick tool. And then, you need to take these clips off. So these clips push out that way on each injector. And then you'll put the new ones in place, pop those clips back on. You're gonna wanna lube the O-rings on both sides with a little bit of motor oil. Motor oil works perfectly fine. You're just not gonna want to install these bushings dry. You do want them slightly lubed to get a good seal. So I like to use just a little bit of motor oil on all the O-rings, and then we'll put the new injectors in and just install this back in place. Again, really easy install. All right, not sure if you can see it right there. Let me just move this light a little bit. All right, so right there, you can see that O-ring is in there. You can see I already pulled one out. So all you need to do is get a little pick tool. Be very gentle because you do not want to scratch inside of where this seals. And you're just gonna pull this out. It should come right out. I'm gonna go ahead and go that way. There we go. Got them both out. Now I can go ahead and put the new O-rings in. I'm gonna wipe all these little entrances with a paper towel real quick just to make sure I got a nice clean surface. All right, I got all my injectors fitted onto the rail. These little clips can be a little bit tricky to get on there perfectly. You just need to make sure that that little part is clipping, on the inside of these little grooves. You need to push on it with with some pliers or something like that. That's what I did, so that way I can make sure that they locked into each little groove. But once you do that, you should be all set. These can be a little bit difficult to get off. You can pull them and then just kind of pry out the little tabs a tiny bit while you do it. Don't go too crazy because you do need to reuse these clips. But yeah, you just put those clips in. Injector plug faces in and clip faces out. So just keep that in mind. That's the orientation that you're going to want to have. But yeah, all mine are in now. So now I'm going to go ahead and take off these bottom caps. I did lube the O-rings on the top caps before I inserted them with just some motor oil. So again, make sure you lube your O-rings. But now we're going to oil up these bottom ones after I remove the covers, and we're going to go ahead and put it back in the car. My fuel injectors are in, and the fuel rail's been bolted down. So again, just tighten up those 2 10mm bolts. Make sure that your fuel injectors are aligned while you're doing this. You want to make sure that they're seating perfectly in those holes before you tighten them up. So make sure that alignment is correct. This thing is kind of like pressure fitted. So when you tighten down this fuel rail, that's what's going to lock in those injectors into place and hold the O-rings tight. So you do need to make sure that these are all lined up nicely, and then just tighten down those 10 mils. Now that that's done, we can just go ahead and reconnect all the connectors, which is super simple. Again, you're just going to plug them in. That's the nice part about having these injectors, is that they are direct plug and plays. You don't even have to use any adapters or anything like that, or do any soldering. All right, they're all connected. So there we go. 800cc injectors are installed. Now I'm ready to go ahead and throw on my intake manifold, and then I'm just going to finish up my oil and water connections, and we're done. All right, it's time for the sketchiest part of the build, drilling the block. So as you can see, I kind of made some rough marks of where I need to drill according to Fab9's instructions. The mark further to the right is the one that I'm going with. I'm actually going to go slightly to the right of that. Oh, my camera went out of focus. Let me go back. There you go. So you can see, so it's just above that little hump. So if you look at dead center, you can see there's that little hump right here. It's going to be just to the top left of that hump is kind of the sweet spot. that is an angled spot. So it's gonna be very difficult to drill it perfectly, you know, straight. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a pilot hole just to the bottom right of where my mark on the right intersects. And then once I do that pilot hole, then I'll enlarge it to the larger hole. So you have two ways that you could go about this. You could get a right angle drill and you could, you know, use one of those in that little space. But the problem I was having is I couldn't find a bit that would fit the hex for the right angle drill that I bought. I bought a Milwaukee one. I ended up returning it because I couldn't find a 22 by 32 bit. I couldn't find one of these 23 by 32 bits that had a small hex on it. Even the you know, I had to get a reduced size. Is like the largest size for the chuck of my drill, and the drill for the right angle had a smaller chuck. I believe it was only like a 3/8 inch chuck, whereas my full size drill goes to a 1/2 inch. But if you look, you can get a straight shot, you know, at that hole through the side of the car if you have a long enough bit. So what I did is I just went and bought, you know, a longer bit. It was like, you know, 50 bucks, so it was a little bit cheaper. Yeah, I didn't get a tool out of it, but, you know, I couldn't find a hex-ended bit that was short enough that was also this depth. The instructions are wrong, so they no longer use a 3/8. It's now 1/2 inch NPT, so, you know, just keep that in mind. That is a 1/2 inch drain now. Hole started. So what I did is I went from the bottom of the car with the really long bit. So I went, you know, underneath the car, and then I was able to kind of get a better, you know, positioning to where it kind of stayed where I wanted it to, because it wanted to walk a lot. So now I got a nice deep hole there, you know, kind of right in the center where I want it to be. It's that one, you know, right there. That's kind of right where I want to be. So now I'm going to go ahead and drill through it. What I'm going to do, you know, this bit is really long and you could easily go too far. You're going into, you know, inside the engine, so you don't want to be, you know, jamming into anything and causing any scratches or anything like that. I'm going to put some tape on the end of this bit, like right here. So that way I'm only going to be able to go in about 1/4 inch. I'm going to wrap a bunch of tape right here to that point. That way I know where to stop. And I'll do the same thing once I step up in size as well. I just want to go over, you know, what I have as the setup. So I got this long DeWalt bit. This is just my pilot bit, so any small bit will do. But then I just put some tape on it, you know, that way I don't go too far. And then I, you know, again, just a regular hand drill going through the side of the car, you know, works perfectly. All right, our first pilot hole is complete. Now we're going to step up to the larger drill bit and do the same thing. Again, just be careful, go slow. You don't need to go fast, so just light pressure too. That way it doesn't like pull itself through, because as soon as you clear through that, the drill's going to want to keep pulling further and go further into the engine. So make sure that you're, you know, going nice and slow, especially as you know, get further into it. But yeah, now we're going to go ahead and step up in size and then continue drilling. All right, my hole is drilled. You can see, you know, there's some metal all over the place. It's a lot of metal coming out. That's a pretty big hole. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with a vacuum, and I'm gonna try vacuum as much of that as I can with my shop vac. After that, then we're gonna tap it and put some grease on the tap, and then we're gonna be running a ton of mineral spirits through this. That way we can hopefully, you know, get some of that metal out of there, because there's definitely gonna be metal inside of the engine right now. So you're gonna wanna try to get as much out as you can. And this is the setup I'm using. It's a 3/4 inch, you know, extensions with a 16mm socket that fits my tap. So that way, you know, I can get it from, you know, a nice straight angle from outside the car. I don't have bearing grease like they recommend, but I do have some lithium grease that's pretty sticky and stays on pretty well. So I'm gonna use some of this to try to catch some of those metal flakes. But again, at the end, we're also gonna be putting a bunch of mineral spirits through that as well, just to try to rinse out as much as we can. And I'll probably do a really short oil change for my next oil change. All right, guys, the hole is tapped. The grease did catch a bunch of metal flakes in it. As you can see, putting a lot of grease between the thread is what really caught most of it. So a ton of the metal did get caught, you know, using the grease trick. There's, you know, grease on the outside, you know, of the fitting now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and clean the surface down real good. First, I'm gonna spray it with some, you know, cleaner of some sort, probably some like rubbing alcohol, because I don't want to use brake cleaner just in case it'll mess with the bonding later. And then what I did is, I did thread in my fitting already just to see when it started snugging up. And it did start snugging up roughly halfway through the threads, which is what I was kind of looking for. I'm also going to use some JB weld. All right, as you can see, I got the hole cleaned out. I can't feel any, metal. If I stick my finger in there, I couldn't feel any loose metal around the edges anymore. I sprayed it with a ton of mineral spirits. I had a big industrial spray bottle, and I just kept spraying and spraying and spraying. I had a nice steady stream going into my drain pan. So that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to spray a bunch of mineral spirits into it and kind of flush out any metal flakes that might be in there. Hopefully everything else, if there's anything else in there, just falls into the bottom of the oil pan. If it gets picked up by the pickup tube, it'll just go to the oil filter and hopefully get caught there. So, hopefully not too much more metals in the engine. But I'm going to do an oil change, really shortly after I do this install too, just in case there's anything residual. Hopefully a lot of oil being in the system will catch a lot of it, and then I'll just be able to drop it all out when I do an oil change as well. That's the only unfortunate part of this is, you're bound to get some metal into the engine, and it's hard to get it all out. So you just need to make sure that you're, doing anything you can to prevent any further damage. So next we're going to go ahead and put the fitting on. So I got the fitting ready. I'm going to go ahead and just put a ton of thread sealant. I'm going to coat the hell out of this thing with some liquid thread sealant. Then I'm going to thread it into place, and then I'm going to put a bunch of JB weld around it and let that cure. All right, guys, the turbo drain is in. It was pretty hard to turn that fitting. You can't really get a wrench on it where it is. And once it starts to seal, MPTs by nature get really tough to turn. So it actually might have a pretty good seal on it, but I'm still going to use some GB weld just to be safe. I'm going to wipe away the excess sealant that's there. So there was some excess sealant that come out, of course, because I did go really heavy on the sealant. So to turn the piece, what I used is a small 1/4-inch socket, and I just put this head of it in there, and I just kind of spun it around that way using this as leverage to spin the piece. I only did one turn once it got tight, and then I, just worried about getting my angle, right. I didn't want it to, kind of go up at all. I wanted it to maintain a downward angle. This was about as good as I could get. It's coming out of the turbo, it's about as good as you're gonna get. So pretty happy with it, and I think it'll, seal pretty good based on how tight those NPT threads felt. All right, guys, I got my water hookup connected for the turbo. So this is the one that goes to the line that runs to the bottom of your expansion tank. You're moving your expansion tank over from here to all the way over here. So you need to extend that hose. Or you can run a long hose from there all the way down to there, which I'll probably do at some point, but I didn't have, I don't really like the quality of this hose that I got. So I'm gonna wait until I can get some nice thick triple ply stuff like this that's really firm and tough to reroute a whole line there. So what I did is I just used that 5/8 hose barb that I didn't use for my intake kit. I used that hose barb right here and just kind of connected these, with the hose barb, and then torqued them down nice and tight with some clamps. So yeah, I wish this was a 90-degree, to be honest. I think it would have been a much nicer routing if this was a 90-degree fitting, because then you could have kind of ran it, along with this if you needed to with all this extra length. Because as you can see, there's plenty of extra, wire here. It actually goes all the way underneath, over there. So I would have liked if they would have ran this, with a 90-degree fitting, which they did show in one of their pictures. So I wonder why, decision to kind of switch back to a straight fitting is. Just given the area and it going straight towards the motor, again, I would rather have a 90-degree fitting there. But yeah, I got this hooked up, so now we just got to connect this to the bottom of the tank, so it's going to go there. This fitting, and it'll sit like this. And then once that's done, we're pretty much ready to go. All right, guys, so for the turbo coolant feed, you're gonna cut your heater pipe right here into 2 pieces. So you're gonna wanna do this in a spot to where it routes really nicely. I did it right here because that metal is really thick right there. So I went ahead and just routed this, straight up, cut it right here. And then again, your turbo coolant drain is gonna go to the bottom of your expansion tank. So that'll be your water line connections. All right, guys, so real quick, I wanna show you, how I'm running my vacuum lines for my turbo. So I'm getting my intake manifold reference off of the evap line. I decided to use the evap line because it is on a solenoid, so it should, shut when it's not trying to release gas vapor. So, that's why I chose that line. It shouldn't really, back pressure through the system that often. And then what I did is I just teed off of that. And, again, I bolted it down here because I'm running a Fab9 intake manifold. So I hard mounted my evap in a new location, running a line, all the way across the car. Just under the cowl there, kind of out of the way. connected over here to my boost controller's map sensor. So this map sensor goes to my boost controller specifically. I just hard mounted it in here with some hardware. It's nice and tight, worked out perfectly. And then this hose is going to my blow off valve. So this is gonna go to the blow off valve. So whenever the intake manifold, you know, sees the drop in pressure or that, you know, close of the throttle body, it's gonna push that and open up the blow off valve right here. So that's how I have mine set up. Down the turbo, it's a lot harder to show you, but I did show you this in my turbo video. So we are going from turbo source to the boost controller, just like it comes when you get the turbo from Borg Warner, and then from the boost controller to the wastegate. You have to run it off that end nipple and go to the wastegate, because what you're doing is you're limiting the flow of air to the wastegate to try to hold your boost pressure where you want it. You know, it can always let full through, but how a boost controller works is it limits the amount of air going to the wastegate actuator. So yeah, that's how I have my vacuum lines ran. It was pretty easy. It was a little bit difficult to get the one on the fitting for the blow off valve. What I did is I turned it all the way upside down. It was kind of nice that I had the Turbo Smart one where I could rotate the nipple. I rotated straight down, put it on, then rotated it back up. The lines for the turbo, make sure you have those done before you put it in. So make sure you're not gonna be able to get to those. That's the one unfortunate thing about how tight this turbo is down here. You can't really get your hand even to certain things. So the only way to do it would be to disconnect everything and take the whole turbo out again and redo it. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. So make sure you have that figured out before you put it down in there. The nice part is though, that whole system's kind of contained down there. The only one that needs to come up here is gonna be, you know, going for your blow off valve. You probably could even, you know, put the blow off valve and everything all on one down there, but you know, because I am running a boost controller, and my boost controller, you know, is functioning down there, I want to make sure that I am running, you know, getting my map sensor pressure from my intake manifold as well. So that way I'm getting like kind of two readouts almost on boost. All right guys, sorry about the noise in the background. One of my neighbors is pressure washing their house, but I want to show you the catch can setup that I'm going to be running on the valve cover vent. So definitely want to run a catch can setup now that I'm going boosted. I debated doing a recirculating catch can. I might do one down the road, but right now I'm just going to go ahead and set it up to VTA since I'll be tracking this car mostly. And I don't really mind, you know, the little bit of smell that it gives. So I got an Evil Energy catch can. They're super cheap. Catch cans are really basic. There's no reason to go out and spend $300 on a catch can. You're probably getting ripped off if you're spending that much. They all pretty much do the same thing. They may be a little bit different, but there's not that big of a difference. And you know, you really don't need anything super fancy. So the Evil Energy one, it's pretty nice. It's pretty much like a Mishimoto knockoff. It has a, you know, stick to check, you know, how much oil is in there, which is kind of nice. So you don't have to like undo the bottom every time to check it. You can just undo the dipstick. It can do recirculating or VTA, so it's set up, you know, to be VTA or recirc. You can, you know, put this cap on there if you want to make it, you know, recirculating, or you just put the filter on top if you want it to be a VTA. I'm going to be doing a VTA setup. Some other things to keep in mind is how they have this can set up. You do need to change it depending on how you use it. They don't really include instructions that tell you how to do this or how to set it up properly. So I'm going to show you that now. So if you look in here, you can see the one that's marked in goes straight in and then straight out. So what you want a catch can to do is to catch the gases for a little while and allow the gases to kind of move throughout it and, you know, get stuck on their way out. You know, usually by having like little pieces of metal and things like that. A lot of people use just steel wool inside of catch cans. It's super effective because what happens is the little oil molecules cling to these little pieces of metal inside this filter. So the setup from Evil Energy is pretty nice because they give you a bunch of steel wool. What I did is I cut enough of it to where I could fit it into this little filter that they have. So, you know, you put this on and then you screw that into place here. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be rounding my in through the out. So I'm going to be rounding the gases from the VTA, from the valve cover into the out port. And then that way, you know, it'll shoot out here, fill the area of the catch can, and then on the way out, it's gonna, you know, hit the filter right here, hopefully get caught and continue to drip out before it pushes out. What I'm trying to do is make it a longer path to get out of the catch can as opposed to it just going straight out. If that's what it's doing, just going straight out, it's not even gonna, go in through this filter. It's just gonna, push right by and just go straight out, and I'm not gonna get any of that filtration that I'm looking for. So that's what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna go ahead and put this on there. That way, it is going straight out. Hey guys, again, sorry for the background noise. My neighbor's pressure washing still. But here's what I ended up with my final product for the catch can. So I made a little bracket out of some 1/8 aluminum. And what I did is I went and sourced a bolt from Ace Hardware. It's an M8 by 1.25. And then I used the included hardware, which, ended up being perfect. It's like super close there, but not touching. You can just see the gaps between the hardware and the catch can. And I did round out the edges a little bit, so there's no sharp edges on this. They didn't give you a plug, to plug any of the holes, so I'll have to order one of those. For now, all I did is wrap up a bunch of duct tape, and then I put a hose clamp on it. So that'll work for now, and that'll be, plenty good. It'll definitely be airtight. And this will not have that much pressure because it is BTA, so, it should work perfectly. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this in there. But again, we're gonna use the out port since we're using this in the BTA function, and we're, everything's, tied up. This mounts perfectly in place on the car, so I'll show you in just a second. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of what I mean. If I was running it through that in port, it would most likely just go straight out the filter. It's gonna take the path of least resistance. So by having it go in through the out port, it's gonna go into here, then have to go through here before it can escape. And it's gonna have to completely go through that filter as opposed to maybe only 30% or 20% going down and taking this other route. So that's why I'm setting it up this way. It is a sweet red anodized. Again, this thing was only like 30 bucks. They have a bunch of colors to choose from. I went with red because I'm kind of doing a red accent thing on my car. But again, catch cans aren't fancy. You don't need to spend a ton of money on them. It is a good idea to have one though. Eventually I might upgrade to a bigger one. This one's not huge. It's a good size. I'll just have to check it, somewhat often. All right, and here's the final product of the catch can setup. So as you can see, I mounted in there with that one bolt. It's a M8 by 1.25 by like 16 millimeter. And then I used the bolts that were included to secure this to it. Make sure you tighten the factory mount bolts. I did notice these were loose from the factory, so I tightened those up. And then yeah, these, tighten up. These have those serrated nuts, so they gripped on really nicely and you're able to snug that down pretty nice. And I just used some 5/8 push lock fuel hose. Put a clamp on it on this end, a clamp on it on that end. So now it's, nice and, perfectly routed. So this is a pretty clean setup for now. This is really cheap. I'll probably upgrade it down the road to something bigger to have a little bit more capacity. But for now, this is a pretty good setup to get me going. All right, so if you're running the Fab9 intake manifold, the piping that comes with it is kind of long. It's definitely too long to run with the manifold like in a proper setup. It'll work though, because like this pipe fits inside of this pipe. So because you can do that, it should give you the airflow that you need, and the air's feeding in this direction. So it won't be like running into any resistance, when it kind of hits this way. But just kind of keep that in mind that like these, are definitely too long. So what I might do is I might get a bead tool eventually, and I may cut this a little bit shorter and make a new bead all the way around the pipe, because yeah, it's just a, kind of a pain in the butt. I did have to, again, cut this into a 30-degree coupler really short. And I'm gonna get a 3-inch worm drive clamp to clamp it, up here, because you don't really have a lot of area to bite on right here. So like one of the T-bolt clamps might not really work that well, but I'm gonna go ahead and see what I can do. Here's my exhaust solution for the Fab9 EFR turbo kit. So I just mimicked their slip joint connection. So I took their 3-inch V-band and I put a 3-inch to 2.5-inch reducer. And then I found a little slip-on piece that's made to slip on a 2.5-inch exhaust piping. And I just cut the end off it, and then I welded it here. So this is like 2.64 inches total diameter. And it fits a 2.5 on the inside, so the factory pipe can slide right in there. It's pretty, tight fit, so it doesn't really have like a big lip at all. It has a slight lip, but nothing too big. And then I'm gonna clamp it with this. So this part goes, onto there, and it slips all the way in, and it covers all the way up to here. And then the other side goes on your exhaust part. So this will, slide onto there, be all the way to there. and then the other side will go, you know, on your exhaust. So that's kind of how I have it set up. Worked pretty perfectly in my test fitting. And I got this welded at an exhaust shop. They MIG welded it, not the prettiest welds, but it'll hold for 20 bucks. They welded it for, so for 20 bucks, I'm totally happy with these welds. Saved me a lot of money going to an exhaust shop. All right, guys, so now what I'm doing is I'm priming the oil system. It's really important to do this for an EFR turbo. You don't want to dry start it. It's even called out in the instructions that come from Borg-Warner. So all I did is I pulled all my coils out, pulled my spark plugs from every cylinder. That way no pressure's building up, and just disconnected all my fuel injectors. That way no fuel's flowing into the system and I'm not washing down the cylinders with fuel. So that's what you're gonna wanna do. All right, and it's gonna sound a lot different than you're used to because you're not gonna be building any compression, so don't worry about it like sounding weird. But yeah, you'll just go ahead and crank it. I'm gonna do it for about 15 seconds. And that should be enough to build some oil pressure. That should have gotten, you know, some oil flowing through the system. Once it starts, it'll get even more, but I just wanted to get some going to the turbo. It'd be nice if you could pull your hose to the turbo and actually see it dripping out, but mine was way too tight to get it off again. I'd probably have to cut the hose and replace it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say, you know, it probably has some oil pressure after cranking it for that many revolutions. All right, guys, we're ready to start tuning. So now we're gonna go ahead and hook up our laptop and get our tune loaded. So I got my tune from Fab9. I have an ECU Tech tune, so you can see I got the ECU dongle down there, cut next to your OBD2 port, and it's Bluetooth as well, so it can connect to your phone. You can actually, if you have like a touchscreen here that was Android, mine's not Android yet, but I might replace this. If you had an Android, you could have the ECU Tech app here, and you could have like your coolant temp and really any other, you know, sensor that the ECU can see, you could have on a gauge right here. And with the ECU Tech one, you can actually customize them any way you want. I'll share a clip real quick of how it looks in my GTR because I have the same system. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and get our tune loaded. So, you know, with the ECU Tech tune, you need to get your tune from your tuner. So I'm going with Fab9. You submit a ticket with them, giving them the details of like what your car has, all the parts that are different from your car from stock, that it needs to be modded for. So things like different map sensors, different intakes, turbo kit, intake manifold, throttle body, anything that's going to mess with airflow or anything like that, you're going to want to, you know, make sure that you detail so that they know, you know, how to properly tune it. And then they can take logs. So you'll like do a log, they'll review the log, you know, see what's going on, and adjust things as necessary. So if it's too lean in some areas, they'll, you know, richen it up. If it needs timing reduced, if you're getting too much knock, you know, whatever it is, they'll kind of tweak it. And they usually start real conservative and then move it more aggressive and then scale back. You know, a lot of the times what most tuners do. So you hit a point to where like you see a little bit of knock and you kind of go, okay, let's step back a little bit from there, make it real nice and safe. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get tuned. So, you know, with this one, you can either get the phone flash or you can do it through your laptop. I like being able to do it through my laptop, but I do have phone flash as well. But when you're doing an update, I would rather be on a corded connection just for safety. I don't want to brick my ECU. So make sure your laptop's charged, make sure your car battery is plenty charged. If it's a really old battery, you may even want to consider replacing it because you do not want a battery to die while you're tuning. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead. Again, I got this hooked up. You need to put in your driver dongle. So this little dongle is a driver dongle. I'm using a splitter here because I didn't have enough ports to do all this and connect my phone as well. This one goes to the OBD2 port connector right there. And then again, you got your drivers right here that you have to have. And if you don't have this in, you'll get a warning when you try to open the Pro ECU system. So we got all this set up. Now we're gonna go ahead and turn the car on. Let me go ahead and do that now. All right, just to on, that's as far as you're gonna go. All right, and then now you're gonna wanna go here to your Pro ECU once the car's on, and you're gonna go to detect. So tools, detect vehicle. It should automatically detect what kind of car you have. Then you're gonna go to program ECU. Now you're gonna find the ROM file that you wanna load. So, you know, make sure you have them saved in a place where you can find them. And now I'm gonna go, you know, to the one that I just got today. So I saved that one under my tunes. I'm gonna organize it by date. So here's the one that I got from Brian later today. It was at the end of the day. So I'm gonna go ahead and open that. And then we just click Program ECU. So you're just gonna click that. It's gonna start doing its thing. What you want to do is you want to watch that right down there. So you want to watch that transfer data. It's going to start at 100% and then it's going to go down and then you're going to go, all the way back up. So there it goes. Now it's starting to count. Once this gets to 100%, it's going to have you turn the car off and back on. Then it's going to ask you if you want to clear the codes. Usually I do every time because sometimes doing this will set a code off. And then you're ready to go after that. So we'll go ahead and let this load and then we'll go to the next step. All right, it's finished. It's at 100%. So now it says ECU must be restarted, off, then on, and then hit OK. So you're gonna turn the key all the way to the off position and turn it back on. And then we're just gonna hit OK. All right, and then we're gonna clear all the codes. It's gonna go through its little process here. All right, now we're done. So that's it. We're good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off, get the car ready to go take some logs. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. I'm gonna go ahead and end it with some running clips of the Turbo Miata.